Hello, welcome to the third of our summer seminars. And this one, as I hope you were expecting, is about the governing board's role in achieving pupil wellbeing. My name's Emma Knights, and I'm the Chief Executive here at GA. And as always, I have a team of people who are actually doing the work. So you will hear me referring to various people as we go along. And today it's Ella who's in charge of our slides. So can you move me on, please, Ella? I think most of you that have joined us will be really well aware of how we run our forums and networks. We try and make them as interactive as possible, and our members are always incredibly good at making use of the chat function to comment, to share practice, and to ask questions of the panel. So please feel free to start doing that at any point. And absolutely, the presentation will be emailed later to you. Oh, I've actually just realized I put this week there, and that's actually not true. I think it'll be early next week because it may take us a little while to get the recordings sorted for sharing, and that is the big difference from our other forums. We do share the recordings of the conference seminars with all our membership, so I thought I'd just better warn you about that in case there were things you didn't necessarily want to share with tens of thousands of other people. And lastly, thank you so much for what you do week in, week out for your schools, for your pupils. It is very much appreciated by many, particularly by NGA, but whether you're told that enough is another question. So thank you especially for joining us this afternoon on what certainly in the Midlands is a wonderful sunny afternoon. On to the next, please. We do take these conversations right up to 6 o'clock. So rather than mention this at the end, I thought I would flash this in front of you now. It's the other events that we've got coming up later this term, and in particular tomorrow's, if you're not registered for and wanted to join us on the board's role in supporting disadvantaged pupils. Can you move me on to the next, please? Now this is a little plug for a piece of work that we're just starting to do, and Adelaide has asked if any of you govern in early years settings and want to be part of the focus groups that she's organising in order to try and identify the issues and challenges that you're facing and that you would like information and guidance on from NGA, then please do get involved. And I think this is a really good way to say that I think this is an example of how NGA tries to interact with our members. We're always very keen to make sure that what we're doing is what you need, but also to trial things with you. And I have to say, you've been absolutely brilliant over the last year in looking at some of the draft materials that we are developing in a whole range of different subjects and improving them for the governance community. So thank you for that. Please move me on. Oh, I've just realized I had forgotten to say that with the hashtag is very big and bold at the bottom, NGA Conf. For any of you that do tweet, please do participate in that way as well. So today, pupil wellbeing. We have an absolutely fabulous panel, and they're all going to talk to you about the work that they're doing in this field. They're all far more experts in this than we at NGA would hold ourselves out to be, and I really appreciate the way in which the organizations that are working on mental health well-being are really supporting people like NGA to make sure that we're delivering the best information and advice that we can to our members. So we really do appreciate this input, and I think we're all going to learn a lot from the panel. However, despite having we're 5 people on our panel, I very much am going to make sure we also have some time for questions at the end in order to close, as we promised, by 6 o'clock. So without any more ado, as usual on our events, we'd just like to see who we have in the room. So Richard, I believe you are going to put up a couple of polls. If you could complete those, and some of you who attend these do govern in more than one place, so I think it allows you to recognize that as well. And when you have enough, Richard, please do share them with us. Okay, have we got any numbers there?
Just give me one.
Great. It's been really interesting to see in the seminars how the majority of those of you attending are other governors and trustees, which sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? Other governors and trustees. It absolutely isn't. It is the board as a whole that's a team. So it's absolutely crucial that other people are involved as well. I'm sure you know we've done a lot of work on the role of chairs and vice chairs over the last couple of years, and that team sharing the work is incredibly important. And then that's quite interesting, actually. This is the first time that we've had just a majority, 51% of maintained schools, and slightly fewer matched trustees here. So what you have been talking to us about pupil wellbeing for a number of years now. This isn't, 2022 isn't the first time that NGA has thought about pupil wellbeing. You will know, I'm sure many of you will fill in our annual governance survey. So we have been plotting the rise of for mental health and well-being as one of your concerns over the years, and then in 2021 it actually took the top place. I'm making that sound as though it's some sort of race, isn't it? But I hope what that shows is that you all, the audience, have been concerned about this really quite a long time. I remember talking about it when Lord Nash was Minister for Governance with him, and that's some years ago. That's about 6 years ago now. We also asked you a little bit more information about how many of you are receiving data on pupil mental health and well-being. That's not because we're obsessed by numbers, but it was really a way of trying to say how many of you have got are seeking information on this topic. We felt that was a bit of a proxy for how many people then went on and had a conversation about it. Now this is a little bit of a ta-da moment. We are this year. Sorry, sorry. Could you make sure you've muted yourself? I was just having a few. So we've got a few very early findings from our 2022 survey. So these haven't been quite fine-tuned, but just looking at the raw data, the sort of things that you're saying that your schools or trusts do in order to support pupil mental health included in-school early intervention, training right across the school staff, but also that work with external community services, trying to find support externally as well. What would you benefit from? The other side of that coin, you want more access to specialist services, and that's something that we've heard year on year, but with increasing urgency and clamour. More funding for this area of work and high quality training for staff. And I'm sure all those things will be covered today. So if we can move on, please. We have produced a couple of resources. We've started with an information sheet on pupil mental health and well-being. And then there are a number of other resources, guides, blogs, webinar articles in our magazine, and those links will be sent out to you alongside the PowerPoint. And now I know today is about pupils, but I did just want to mention staff and school leaders' well-being as well, because that is an equally important issue. You tell us that, we know that from our conversations as well. Some of you who joined us yesterday will have heard that very much writ large in our leadership seminar. And although I imagine it might get a little bit touched on by Well Schools, I just didn't want that to be overlooked. But really today we are focusing on pupils. So if you can move me on, please, Ella. And there we are, a mention to of Well Schools. We're really pleased to be part of this coalition, which is sort of powered by Youth Sports Trust, and we've got Kay with us to talk about it more. So I won't say anything else except to reiterate that point, that there's a really great coalition of people that are coming together to share resources that are freely available. And I think all of us are trying to make sure that we don't duplicate each other, that we cross-refer to each other, that we build on the best, rather than spending time doing something that somebody else already has. And I think it's true to say actually that everybody on the panel today is involved in Well Schools in one way or another. So if we can move that on. So we are going to continue to work on this, and we would very much like your thoughts very explicitly. Please, we will be picking up on what you say today, what you ask about today, and we will continue to talk to other organisations in the field, and of course the Department for Education. So we've got there Elizabeth Collins' email address, because she's the person that's very much leading this work for us. So may I move on, please? So on to our first speaker, and Deirdre Kehoe, I hope I've pronounced that right, from Young Minds. We're especially grateful to you, Deirdre, for joining us, because this was a very last minute substitution because your colleague was ill today. So Deirdre, thank you so much for coming to speak to us from Young Minds to set the context for this discussion. The floor is now yours.
Oh, thanks, Emma, and hello to everybody. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you. So Emma asked me to set the scene around how the young people's mental health, and I have to say setting the scene is a tough start, because right now there is an unprecedented crisis in young people's mental health. You all know that the pandemic has brought young people isolation from friends and family, disruption to education and work, and reduced access to support, including from counsellors and GPs. So despite more investment than ever in young people's mental health services, at Young Minds we're seeing, or all of us are seeing, record numbers of young people experiencing mental health problems and needing support. So I'm just going to go to the stats, if that's all right, on the first slide, please. So some of you may be familiar with these. According to NHS data, the number of young people referred to children and adolescent mental health services, which I'm going to call CAMS, for the month of November, so just for the month, was over 104,000 young people, which is astonishing and the highest ever recorded. Recent NHS data shows that 1 in 6 young people now have a probable mental health disorder, and that's up from 1 in 9 in 2017. And according to the Centre for Mental Health, 1.5 million children and young people will need mental health support in the next decade. So these numbers make it really clear that mental health is a growing problem. So what are young people struggling with? Within our services at Young Minds, we've seen the same concerns being raised now as before the pandemic. And the top topics are for us anxiety, which I know is
Deirdre, I thought it was me, but I think it might be you that has frozen. Ella, perhaps it might be worth moving on the slides, and we'll come back to Deirdre should she reappear. I'm sorry about that. It's always very awkward, but it's so much worse for the speaker, isn't it, when they disappear from one of these events. But what I'm going to do, there you are with the panel of 5, to move on to Simone Bays, who is joining us from the Department for Education, Programme Director for Children and Young People's Mental Health. Simone, we're really, really pleased that you've been able to make the time to join us. So the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm sorry that Deirdre has not had the opportunity to continue. I think I would give you some of the same stats and perhaps paint the picture ever so slightly differently whilst the stats remain the same. It's a pleasure to be here as a parent, as an ex-governor, and as the wife of a governor. And the reason I guess I would tell a slightly different story is because we all have mental health, just like physical health. And as individuals, we need to look after our own mental health and well-being. And we can, of course, in our families, work and community, help others look after theirs. And there is a risk that talk of mental health always in terms of problems and crisis and so on exacerbates, I think, our historical tendency to see mental health as something scary and about a subset of other people somewhere else over there. I guess I want to start by saying that the pastoral care role of schools has always been important, and amidst statutory duties around employment duties, but also safeguarding special educational needs and disabilities and so on. If you look across what schools do in relation to mental health and well-being, we have long talked about the sort of 4 roles of schools in promoting positive mental health and well-being and preventing mental health illness, in identifying issues and problems, emerging issues and problems, and where dealing with the normal emotional experiences of growing up and of dealing with what have been quite extraordinary circumstances over the last couple of years, dealing with bereavement and so on, where kids are not able to process what's happening in a way that enables them to recover and to take on all the challenges of life. And then about providing early support in schools and about referral to and liaison with more specialist services. And what was Public Health England and is now the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, and we at DFE have shared 8 principles of a whole school approach. In the middle of this circle, if you can read it okay, it talks about leadership and management that supports and champions efforts to promote emotional health and well-being, and that's from and including you as governors, through the leadership team of the school, and helping create that ethos and environment that promotes respect and values diversity. And the importance of creating that sort of calm, safe, supportive environment in schools is very much emphasised in the recent Schools White Paper. And it is now a statutory, part of the curriculum of state schools for wellbeing and mental health to be part of the curriculum. And there are some module about how to do that, and so on, and various tools around. It's also about enabling student voice to influence decisions around staff development, as an essential part of an approach that enables the school to promote and support kids, unless it's practicing what it preaches with its staff. It's very difficult to pour from an empty jug if staff are not in a good place themselves. Identifying need and monitoring the impact of interventions, working with parents and carers, providing targeted support and appropriate referral on to more specialist services. And again, it's very much recognised in the white paper how providing targeted support and working with other services is a really key part of supporting well-being, to support attendance, behaviour, attainment, and how those things are so interconnected with how kids feel. So if we go on to the next slide, I have very much noticed that as part of the survey results from 2022, Emma, the sort of top priorities around access to specialist services and so on. I can say more about that later, but I'm going to stick with saying something about the sort of key support that we offer for schools at the moment, and can come back to some of that if that would be helpful in the questions and discussions subsequently. As part of our joint programme of work with health, which includes seeking to improve access to specialist services, we are encouraging schools to have a senior lead for mental health and wellbeing. And the latest data in June 21 showed that 84% of schools reported having a designated lead responsible for coordinating schools' mental health and wellbeing provision. That may or may not be somebody who's part of the leadership team. And our ask is that there needs to be a strategic leadership role. That somebody taking a lead on this that can really make changes to the culture and environment of a school as a whole. And so it really does need to be owned in the leadership team, even if you almost in every case you need a wider team approach to delivering what you're doing within a school. So we have offered training for a senior lead in each school, and recognising the differing starting points that different leads have in terms of the experience and knowledge they have. There is a sort of self-assessment tool for leads to look at areas of the sort of learning outcomes where they already feel that they have the necessary knowledge and skills, and areas that they want to develop, and then to find training suitable for their type of setting and the skills and level of experience that they have. And we opened applications in October of last year, and now more than, over 35% of eligible settings, schools and colleges that is, claimed a grant to embark on training between October and March. And that includes half of all secondaries. So good progress towards our offer of offering that for all schools by 2025. I don't know how I'm doing on time, Emma, having begun before we expected. And I can either say something a bit more about the role of governing bodies, or we can kind of get into that more later.
Well, why don't you? I know that you've just got, Ella, if you can move the slide on one, you've got a few thoughts about governing boards. So I think that seems very pertinent. So, and then Deirdre has appeared, so she will come back and finish off after you. But yes, please do speak to that slide as well.
Lovely, thank you. So just highlighting for you, you may be familiar with this from the governance handbook, that it is the role of governors to show regard for the wellbeing and mental health of the school leadership team and teaching staff, and to promote well-being of pupils, with the elements listed here, and how governing bodies do that, how boards choose to do that, is up to them. There is a suggestion about designating a lead, but that is a choice. And I guess the main message I wanted to give is that if a school leadership team wants to take and to develop its whole school approach to mental health and well-being, they need your support. They can't do it without you, because it does need to infuse and influence and be influenced by the rest of the school culture and environment. And there are a variety of practical things you can do. There are some suggestions here, and clearly there's lots more in the NGA material. I guess I would ask you particularly to explore whether your school has a senior lead, and if not, how they could get to that point, and indeed whether they have taken up training. And as a key outcome of training is about equipping them to form a plan to develop and implement their whole school approach. You could be asking to see their plan for developing or improving the school's approach. So those are, I guess, my tips. And I guess what I wanted to say is, a school leadership team can't do this without you, and they might do it a whole lot better, or indeed do it at all because of you and with you. And just enormous thanks for the commitment that you show day in, day out, to your schools, and by being here on such a hot afternoon, certainly from North London.
Thank you very much. Simone, took me a moment to get myself unmuted there, and I'm absolutely sure some of the issues you talked about we will come back to in the discussion. So thank you for that. And Dee, thank you for coming back. So
I'm so sorry.
No, don't worry at all. It's happened to me as well, and I have somebody who's to step in the chair if I disappear. So it's one of those things, isn't it, with virtual meetings. So please do. You were about to talk to us, I think, about the top issues. So please do resume.
Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah, sorry everybody. So I was just about to talk about what the top issues were that we were seeing at Young Minds, and what we've seen is very consistent in what those are. So they are the same as they were pre-pandemic. So anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicidal ideation are by far the topics that people call us about and contact us about the most. However, what we have seen is that the issues have become far more complex in the last year or so, with many young people struggling with more than one mental health challenge at a time, and many finding it very difficult to access support, be that through GPs, their CAM service, or A&E. And this is really impacting on their home life, school, attainment, attendance, and their ability to build and maintain meaningful relationships. So I hope that gives you a flavour of what people are worried about, I suppose. But it's really interesting to see what's happening when they ask for help. So even before the pandemic, only 25% of young people who are referred to CAM services managed to access support. For many, they just don't meet the increasingly higher threshold to receive care. And although the government also have committed to a 4-week waiting time standard for CAMHS, you will know, and I've seen in the chat, for many it takes much longer than this just to get to the assessment stage. So with record numbers now being referred into CAMHS, the need is far outstripping the service available. And the impact on families and schools is enormous. We're hearing from 3 in 4 parents that their children's mental health is worsening while waiting for referrals to traditional mental health services. And then that's being picked up in schools. It's also reflected in a survey that Young Minds has done with GPs, where only 10% of GPs surveyed agree that they feel confident that a referral to the NHS Children and Young People's Mental Health Services will result in treatment. And in that same survey, only 8% of GPs surveyed agree that there is a good community support for young people with mental health problems in their area. So that could be youth clubs or local charities or drop-in centres. So really the landscape out there is very, very difficult. Schools are undoubtedly on the front line when it comes to mental health support for young people, and many schools are taking steps to make some provisions for mental health support. Simone has just talked about the mental health support leads, so I won't cover that again. There's also progress being made to put schools' mental health support teams. So this is having a team liaising between local CAMHS services and the school up in schools. But up to March, only 20% of schools had these in place. So it's only 1 in 5 will have one of those. And our research with young people has found that many areas of existing education policy, from exam culture to behaviour management and the pressures of pandemic catch-up, are playing a part in the rising prevalence of mental health issues. So although there's a really strong commitment within schools to do more support for young people's mental health, this is a bit of a way to go before we have a strong whole school approach across every school. And then finally, just in setting the scene, I wanted to note that for many young people, it's structural inequalities that are the root of mental health problems. So for example, the discrimination faced by LGBTQ+, Black and minoritized and disabled young people in school, online and in their communities also plays a massive part. And things like poor housing, poor quality housing, access to employment, financial insecurity, benefits and underfunded community services are all increasing young people's risk of mental health difficulties. So in terms of what can be done, given that half of all mental health problems manifest by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 24, a failure to provide high quality mental health interventions before the age of 25 really creates significant risks for young people. The government is currently developing a 10-year plan for mental health and is consulting widely on this if you want to get involved. We at Young Minds think the real answers lie in early intervention, and that includes whole school approach, reducing the systemic causes of mental health. So in effect, this means increasing young people's own understanding of mental health and how to get support, ensuring they have adults around them who can help, and that can be parents to school staff, to community workers, to mental health services, and then finally all of us working together to tackle the systemic things that impact on young people's mental health, including their experience at school. But that was just setting the scene a little for where we're at. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Dee. That was indeed useful, and particularly, yes, touching on those issues about CAMHS, which, as you say, has been one of the main topics for conversation in the chat. So we will definitely come back to that. Thank you. So now I'd like to introduce Kate, who is a Partnerships Network Director, I beg your pardon, at the Youth Sports Trust, but you are one of the team that is behind Well Schools. So Kay, please do take the floor.
Thank you very much, Emma, and hello everyone. It's lovely to be here today. On that list, I'm also a governor after a coffee with Emma at a conference, and she convinced me that it was my duty to go out there and become a governor, which I did. So also speaking from that experience. So just a couple of slides here we can just skim past, and I guess just picking up on what Dee has brought to life, where Well Schools came from. It came from some of the statistics pre-COVID, but now, you know, we feel that there's even greater need for Well Schools. uniting of the education system. World Schools isn't a program, it's not a product, it's not a tick list of things to do. It's the uniting and galvanizing of people within education that said, we can see this happening for our young people. This is playing out in our schools, and we can see what's happening and going on in the lives of our young people. And we don't feel that we can make a difference. We don't feel that the system, we don't have the confidence to change the system. So we can keep forever delivering programs that create a sticking plaster or a change for a period of time, or we can come together as the greatest stakeholders in the education system, educators, and we can try to create systemic change. So World Schools was born out of a group of educators, and Adrian, who'll come up later, is actually the chair of our board. 34 founding schools and a group of passionate leaders within education that said we need to give other educators the confidence to build schools that not only help young people achieve academically, but also prioritise their health. And that should never be an either or. I'd like to skip this slide and the next slide. And the next one more on. So this is the premise of World Schools, that teachers were telling us the system has to change in order for us to make a difference for pupil well-being. Whereas what we were trying to say is that it's not two ends of a continuum. It's not about well-being on one end and achievement, that those things are inextricably linked. Well pupils are more effective learners. So we can create a system, and we have schools showing how you can prioritise well-being and still achieve academic success in a system where it felt there was high stakes for taking your eye off that achievement ball. So World Schools was created in order to do that. So next slide. So we started on a journey that was very focused on young people, and it was that was the place where we began. It became very obvious when we were uniting together that actually well-led was a really important part. So well-led is all about teacher well-being. And the premise there is that we cannot ask teachers and educators to create a culture of well-being, to create a classroom where they support positive well-being if they themselves aren't well. So we spent a lot of time in World Schools really developing and working on that well-led pillar to try and ensure that we can take positive action around teacher well-being. And that isn't about creating tokenistic change. That's about really understanding the problems and challenges that face teachers and doing something about it. In my role of governors, we had a teacher wellbeing survey within the school, which we did every year dutifully, but didn't really get underneath those questions and really start to understand, okay, what are the things that are having the greatest impact on the wellbeing of our teachers, and what are we going to do that's addressing them? So instead of thinking, well, what we should be doing is running a yoga session after school because that's positive for wellbeing. Well, actually, if the issue is your school marking policy, yoga is not only going to make the problem worse, not better. So it's understanding the problems that cause impacts on wellbeing for teachers and doing things to address those, not doing things we think are good for wellbeing when they're not addressing the problem. And then we've got our two other pillars either side here around which are more focused on young people wellbeing. So the first one is about well prepared. And that focuses on we can't slow the world down for young people. We can't make it any less hectic or any less stressful. But we can in school ensure that young people have a real focus on their physical and mental health. We can ensure that they are physically healthy and they understand how to keep themselves physically healthy and how to look after their body, and they understand the purpose and role for that. And we can understand that they have a health literacy, exactly the things that Dee was just talking about. And so young people really understand the strategies that will help them. They understand the way that they are feeling, they understand their emotions, and they know where to go and get help. So we can give young people a really great physical and mental health toolkit to enable them to successfully face not only the challenges that will come within their education, but the challenges they will face when they go out into the world. And then our final pillar is around well equipped. So this is really trying to broaden the horizons and help schools to understand what it means to have whole school well-being within their school, what that would look like. So the final thing is about what young people learn in school. And well equipped is very much about what skills are we giving young people that they will take out into the world in order to be successful, and what experiences are we giving them that will prepare them and open their eyes up to the world around us. In the 1970s, the top 3 skills demanded of the job market were writing, computer inputting, and reading. And the top 3 skills of today are teamwork, problem solving, and interpersonal skills. we need to ensure throughout education that young people are equipped with the skills that they will need for their future. And that is where Well Equipped sits. So what we started to do here is build together a picture and help schools really look at how they will build a well school. And this isn't a one size fits all. This isn't a quality mark where schools tick off and say what they're doing. It's all about challenging and giving confidence to schools, challenging them to think about how they can create a well school. So really importantly, over the top, we have a well culture, which is all about how you make sure well-being is at the heart of everything you do. It's not a day, it's not a notice board, it's not a week. It is really about ensuring that well-being is at the center of everything that the school are thinking about and doing about. The first decision is, what impact will this have on the well-being of my staff and my pupils? And that becomes the guiding principle. And underneath, we then start to pick out what's well-led, well-prepared and well-equipped. And I'm talking about this, and Adrian was a pioneer of creating a lot of this work. So this is all brought to life in our Steps to Success guide. So final slide. So just bringing to life what support we've got available. And as I said, Well Schools is a community. It's the coming together of like-minded people within education that want to create and make a difference. We don't have all the answers, but when we look at problems, we can unite to try and solve those problems. We can try and find schools and other educators that are already doing things to create solutions and show the journey that they've been on. Because this issue is too big for any one teacher, any one school to tackle alone. So we feel we should all come together. Well Schools not only unites educators, but it also unites other organisations all working together, because we know that it's incredibly important that we prioritise the well-being of our young people because of all the reasons we talked about in the context setting of this. So we have an online community that you can come and visit, where schools will share things that have worked in their school. They will share the challenges that they have. They will share ideas, and we can connect and collaborate. And the address for that's there. Anyone can sign up. Well Schools is completely free. There is no charge for anything that we do in Well Schools. It is about everybody coming together to create that problem. So it's not something that there will ever be a fee for anything we do within Well Schools. So you can come along, you can sign up, and governors can sign up as well and access lots of information from podcasts to other pieces of resources on that community. So go along and have a look. And there's just a few click-throughs on this slide. Oh, there you go. So what that will start to show you, there is different conversations happen within our community. So when you get in, you can start to have a little bit of exploration around, okay, well led. So what's happening in other schools about teacher wellbeing? What does the culture look like, and what are other schools doing about it? We have a social platform, so you can find us by going on to Twitter and following us at Well Schools and find us there. We have an array of podcasts which are all about getting into schools and talking to educators about what they are doing to create positive wellbeing and how they are bringing the pillars of Well Schools to life. On Monday, we released our Adrian Bethune podcast, so go along and have a listen to that one after you've heard Adrian today. And the final click, I think, on there, final 2 clicks actually. So we have a Steps to Success guide, which is a really interactive tool that you can go on to, and it really starts to help you think about the questions you should be asking your senior leadership team and the support that we can offer. But know that there is no silver bullet. There's no quick win here. This is about finding out where is the best place to start and just starting there, not being intimidated by trying to achieve everything, but finding a start place and using the Steps to Success guide as a guide to helping you unpick what next, what could we do, what have other people done, what have other people learned. And there's lots of other things on that platform as well. So for example, one thing I definitely have used through my governing role is, again, a practical guide to measuring wellbeing in schools, created by some of our schools. Adrian was again involved in the creation of that, but really transformed for my school, where I'm a governor, from we were creating our own staff wellbeing surveys, and we use this guide to go and find some really great ones out in the world. That's really transformed the conversation and has really helped us not only to benchmark and understand how our wellbeing looks in comparison to other schools. So lots of tools and resources on there that you can get involved in. And that for me was just sending that around to our senior leadership team, saying, here's a really great, useful, supportive document that can help you. That's a whistle stop on Well Schools.
Thank you so much, Kay. That's really, really helpful. And now we move to Place to Be. Marina Smith is joining us, Head of Mental Health and Wellbeing Programs. But just before I hand the floor to you, Marina, I thought I would mention the fact that Our policy and projects manager was part of the judging team for your recent Place to Be awards, and she came back from that and the award ceremony incredibly enthused. We've already disseminated information around our membership, but also she wrote a blog that went up yesterday. Someone might want to put the link in the chat. So yeah, she was we were pleased to be involved, but it really did yeah, inspire her to think some more about these issues. So pleased to be working with you, Marina, and the floor is yours.
Lovely, thanks very much, Emma. And yeah, I was actually at the Wellbeing Awards, so it was absolutely fantastic to see teachers and several schools and lots of students there as well that have done some amazing work to support children and young people's mental well-being. So yeah, I'm here to talk through over a few minutes, just to talk through a little bit about Place to Be and what we do. So Place to Be has over 25 years experience of working with schools and local communities. We're a charity, a children's mental health charity, providing school-based support and in-depth training programs to improve the emotional well-being of pupils, families, teachers and school staff. So we take a whole school approach, and that means we provide support and advice for everyone in the school community. So that includes pupils, families, staff, and the leadership team as well. So currently we provide embedded mental health services in 450 UK primary and secondary schools, supporting a school community of around 250,000 children and young people. Last year, we had 31,000 children and young people access support for Place to Be, either via our one-to-one counselling or group work programmes. And our frontline work reaches some of the most vulnerable in our society. So children in our services are more likely than other pupils at their school to be eligible for pupil premium, free school meals, to have special education needs, to be looked after children and or on child protection plans. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So that gives you a bit of information about Place to Be and the whole school approach that we take. Alongside that, what we do is offer a service that builds awareness and skills in schools. So during the pandemic, where we used to deliver face-to-face training, we moved on to delivering training online, which was incredibly difficult. However, our clinicians and our staff worked together to put together some materials, and we created the Mental Health Champions Foundation programme, and that launched in August 2020. And the Foundations programme reached over 55,000 teachers and other professionals over last year. The great thing about that programme is as soon as the Mental Health Champions programme has been completed, you then move on to a staff room platform, and our staff room platform currently has about 8,000 teachers on there, and we provide content on a very regular basis to talk about the current landscape, talk about some of the current issues that children and young people might be facing and the current issues. And it offers almost like a community of practice, so it has options for teachers to discuss some of the issues they might be experiencing in schools and also get some advice from other teachers. So it's an absolute great platform to access. Alongside that is our previously spoken about is our Senior Mental Health Leads training programme, and that's to support participants to deliver that whole school approach. So as mentioned previously, the process of the self-assessment almost helps to look at the whole school approach systemically to make that systemic change. So our approach to delivering the Senior Mental Health Leads, along with offering various platforms of e-learning and our Zoom platforms to deliver webinars, we also offer one-to-one consultations, which also allows the senior leaders to bring in other members of the school community to start talking about how we can embed a strategy to support a whole school approach. So based on the evaluation for the Senior Mental Health Leads programme, 80% of those that attended felt that they had a clear plan on how to prioritise the school's mental health activity after the course. It's CPD accredited and Department for Education quality assured as well. So that's a little bit about our building awareness in schools, whilst also delivering that mental health support in schools as well. If we move on to the next slide, please. So here are a few links that gives you some information in terms of how to access some of our training courses. For senior mental health leads, our Champions programme. We also have, if you go online, is a parenting smart course that gives you access, gives parents access and also school leaders access to some advice and information that we offer to support children and young people between the age of 4 and 11 around their mental health and well-being. And if you have any questions and want to inquire about the services that we offer to your school, please feel free to access, to contact us via email at schools@placetobe.org.uk. Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much, Marina. I did actually notice a very quick question that it might just be worth asking you now, because it's a very specific one. Lucy's asking whether wellbeing governors, would your mental health champion foundation program be relevant, do you think, to wellbeing governors, or is it not really targeted?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say governors get onto the Mental Health Champions Foundation programme, which will give you a really good understanding of the teacher's experience of access of the information that they receive and how they can support children and young people.
Thank you very much. And now over to our last panelist. Adrian, you've had quite a lot of name checks already, and you come with a few hats there, don't you? You've founded, and I don't know whether Teach Happy is have I got the intonation right there? Yep. Yeah, and you are both a teacher but also a governor. So please, over to you now.
Great. So my focus is going to be more on the importance of measuring and monitoring well-being in schools. But first, I thought I'd just set the context of why well-being really matters. It might sound really obvious, but I think it's really important to kind of just make it clear why it really matters in schools and the impact schools and teachers can have. So broadly speaking, we know from decent evidence that generally speaking, happier children learn better in school. Those children with higher levels of well-being tend to be more successful in schools. And to flip that around, I recently heard Professor Tamsin Ford at Cambridge University speak, and she said it's very hard to sustain concentration when you are distressed or highly stressed about something. So if you're struggling with a mental health condition, you've got acute anxiety or something like that, it's going to be very hard to learn and do well in school. So children with high levels of well-being tend to do better in school. We also know that happier teachers teach better, that teachers that have good levels of well-being, they have less time off with stress, less time off with sickness. They tend to enjoy their jobs more. They tend to be more present for their students. They tend to respond better to their students' needs. And you cannot, I know this focuses on pupil well-being, but you cannot separate the two. They are completely interlinked, teacher well-being and pupil well-being, because you cannot possibly have happy, well-rounded children in school if your teachers are massively stressed, distressed, anxious, depressed. It's not possible. So, you know, I'm glad everyone's talking about a whole school approach to well-being, because that includes everyone in the whole school community. Now, regardless of the impact of, you know, well-being on attainment, well-being is an important educational goal in its own right. You know, we want people in society to lead happy, well-rounded, satisfying, fulfilling lives. So well-being is an inherent valuable goal in its own right. We want to improve pupil and staff well-being wherever we can. We also want children to grow up to be happy, to lead, and I don't just mean kind of this momentary happiness. I'm talking about experiencing pleasure and purpose in life, fulfilling their potential, going after their goals, leading lives that they're happy and satisfied with. And Kay shared a statistic that a recent YouGov poll shows that pupil happiness, pupil well-being is pretty much the #1 consideration when parents are choosing a school for their child. In fact, it's higher for secondary pupils than it is for primary. For primary, the #1 factor is location of school. Now, we also know from longitudinal data, and I can share a link with Emma who can share it to participants, longitudinal data from the London School of Economics, that a child's emotional well-being is the strongest predictor of adult happiness and well-being. And what these researchers did at London School of Economics and other universities was look at longitudinal data, so where they've been tracing people from birth through childhood, adolescence into adulthood, looking at adults reporting high levels of life satisfaction, trace them back through the data and be able to answer the question, what's the strongest predictor in childhood of adult life satisfaction? The strongest predictor was a child's emotional well-being, particularly at the age of 16. The weakest predictor was the child's intellectual development, essentially the grades they were getting. But then they included all the qualifications a person ever obtains to see if that changes things. And the researchers concluded that a child's emotional well-being is significantly more important than all the qualifications a person ever obtains in terms of predicting their future happiness. But then what we were able to do, that might sound obvious that happy children grow up to be happy adults. What impact can schools and teachers have? The researchers found that actually schools and teachers have a major impact on children's well-being whilst they're at school. In fact, almost as much impact as their own parents did, and almost as much impact as the teachers had on the children's attainment. And so Professor Richard Layard, who's the lead researcher on that longitudinal paper, everyone at Wells Schools, we believe that this is where schools should be investing a lot more time, energy and resources to focusing on whole school approaches to well-being in order to improve and sustain pupil well-being, in order to have a positive impact on their attainment, in order to set them up to lead happy, satisfying, flourishing lives in the future. So that's why well-being is important. Why should we measure well-being? Well, there's a well-known phrase in economics that you should measure what you treasure. If we really treasure pupil well-being and staff well-being, we should measure it. To get a feel for how the people in our school community are doing. So you get that kind of baseline, that benchmark. Secondly, we should measure it to measure the impact our school is having on pupil and staff well-being over time. And if you use the right tools, you can even dig down in the data and see how groups of people are doing. So how are your children with EAL doing? How does that compare to children with SEN? How are boys doing compared to girls? How are the year 5s doing to the year 3s? And I can talk a bit more about the tools in the Q&A. It also is a big element. We talked about the whole school approach to wellbeing. Pupil voice is a big part of it. You know, giving pupils a voice through wellbeing surveys is a really important part. And in fact, when we've been doing it in our schools, the very first time we did it, the pupils were coming up to us lots afterwards saying, that was really good. When can we do this again? They just enjoyed being asked about how they feel about their life inside and outside of school. Measuring wellbeing allows you to, or gives you the opportunity to identify children who may be struggling and who may need some kind of specialist intervention. And as has been said by Dee and other people, that early support is key. It's much easier to prevent mental health difficulties and help resolve them early on than it is to deal with someone that's really struggling further down the line. So those are the key reasons for measuring. What are the resources out there? Well, as Kay mentioned, at Wells Schools, we've designed a practical guide to measuring wellbeing in schools. I was the lead author on that, but I work very closely with the What Works Centre for Wellbeing and the Children's Society. So when specifically, they were also our advisory board members, experts in measuring wellbeing. So the guidance is really on point. And also there are other guides out there which are really good. However, when I started this journey many years ago, I was bamboozled by how many different surveys we could use. You want to be using validated surveys. So what we've done in our guide is just give you a starting point. You could use, you know, we've given 3 or 4 surveys rather than the 30 to 60 there are that are out there. And also something that I found really useful as someone that measures wellbeing in my school is the CORC. So that's the Child Outcomes Research Consortium e-learning module on measuring mental wellbeing in schools. Anyone can do it, it's completely free. So if you're a governor interested in that, go to CORC e-learning module on measuring mental wellbeing in schools. I found it very useful. Download our free practical guide to measuring wellbeing in schools. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions in the Q&A about this further.
Great, thank you so much, Adrian. And now we'll go to the panel Q&A, and I think there are some themes that have been emerging there. So I might not ask every question individually, but also there might be one or two people that may want to come and say it in their own words, because as always with NGA, we always like the fact that we have some incredibly experienced governors and trustees, and some people that are new to the topic, but clearly we also have some people who have been working on the issue of wellbeing, or their schools and boards have for really quite a long time, and there was very much I think an agreement, but correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the biggest problems was the access to external help, specialist help, the waiting list for CAMHS, which one or two of you did mention. So I think I'd like a sort of a reaction, if there is, to that. I know, you know, these things are not within our gift and our influence always, but any tips you have on that. But also, I think somebody also asked, so what can we do to do more for those who are on the waiting list in the meantime? So who is there, anyone who wants to start with that very difficult conundrum? Simone, I imagine you work closely with Department of Health and colleagues on that side. Do you want to
yes, I'm very happy
say something first?
I think the practical focus of your question, and I think there was an offer from a GP in the chat.
Yes.
Hear from them, but as context, it's important to say that the NHS long-term plan pre-COVID promised to invest more in mental health, to grow investment in mental health more than that in, you know, faster than that in physical health, and investment in children and young people's mental health services more than adult mental health services. So this has been a big focus area that the NHS, where the NHS has recognised the need for growth. The Department of Health and Social Care has recognised that need, and there has been a substantial effort to grow services and to grow the workforce. And the fact that it takes a long time to train a specialist is you know, a real challenge in terms of growing specialist services. So the audit of the sort of workforce in mental health published last autumn showed that there'd been a 39% growth between I'm going to get my dates wrong, 2017 and 2021. You know, a very substantial growth. But one of the reasons that we are, as part of the programme that I am jointly leading with Health, is one of the reasons that we are putting mental health support teams into schools is because they can work alongside school staff to provide advice and support on what you can do for those kids on the waiting list in the meanwhile, but also you can provide early intervention to stem the tide, and you can support the school where perhaps they haven't been so proactive in taking a whole school approach to shift more into a sort of preventative space where well-being is more at the core of what goes on. And those mental health support teams will you know, it's a question of how long it takes to train the specialists, and the most junior practitioners in those teams are trained for a year, so we're able to grow them much faster than specialist services. And that's a large part of why the sort of green paper proposals were as they were, and we're able to be growing services in this way and giving access to an extra 345,000 kids. So because of the challenge of growing demand and the fact that we started from a place where the long-term plan said it would take 10 years for every child that needed to see a specialist to be able to do so, even before the pandemic, that is a difficult context for us all. And it means that these challenges about how we can support kids you know, with issues on the journey is really key. When I hear from speakers often put up by young minds at events about their experiences, actually, you know, very often it's not the intervention from a specialist you know, from specialist NHS services, that is the key. Actually having trusted adults that care about you is ultimately what helps kids to recover and to rebuild. And so even for kids in the most complex and challenging contexts and circumstances, I think school staff not being frightened off, not thinking this is beyond my ability to do anything, I need to hand them off to someone else, but being there, listening and understanding and supporting kids is really key. So I'm afraid that's not in a way a satisfactory answer. I can't say it's all going to be better tomorrow, but you know, we had pilots looking at how you can achieve a 4-week wait for specialist services. And I guess the final thing I should just add is that I think, and particularly for primary schools, the fact that mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions like autism and ADHD are dealt with a bit differently in the NHS is sometimes not clear to parents, to school staff and others. And the waits for assessment for neurodevelopmental conditions are considerably longer than for you know, anxiety, depression, that sort of place. It seems like you know, children and young people's mental health services prioritise often in the current context on the basis of sort of safety and you know, and how to protect kids and those around them, those who are at risk of harm. I hope that's
you. And I think yes, thank you for that. And I do again a number of comments, I think, that were talking about some of the overlap between SEND and mental health. And indeed there was somebody who brought that point up about safeguarding, and perhaps I can't remember now whether it was somebody who had a governor that did cover wellbeing as well as safeguarding.
Particularly in school leaders as well. In a primary, you're very likely to have a, you know, someone who covers safeguard, you know, as you know as well as me. Yep. All of these things.
Thank you. I don't know whether anybody wants to come in, but whether Dee or Adrian wants to add to that, and then I will, just to give you a little bit of warning, I was going to bring in Richard Simpson and Joe Olson. I thought you might have something to contribute to this conversation, but if I go back to Dee, Adrian first, and then hopefully you'll be able to unmute yourselves and join us.
I can completely agree with what you said. I've put a few little links in the chat for people to see around Young Minds resources for trusted adults that might be helpful. I think in terms of access to services, there isn't an easy answer at all here, and I suppose from a Young Minds perspective, what we're looking for is almost that multi-prong approach. So we are looking to scale up. Loads and loads and loads of young people tell us that they would much prefer informal support from their community than formal support, because even when they're in services, they're often getting 1 hour a week within that. That is not enough. That doesn't deal with the crisis that happened at home at night or in the school during the day, and they need more than that. So kind of what we hear on our parents' helpline all the time is that adults are often terrified of getting into those conversations with young people because they're worried they'll say the wrong thing and make the situation worse. And yet when we've done our work around it to see what really helps those young people, it's really core skills that many teaching staff or school staff will have around listening well, setting boundaries, following through on what you say you're going to do, that makes the biggest difference to young people, because it gives them an anchor, someone that they can really count on and they feel is in their corner, and that often helps them feel that things are not as bad as they may have thought. Saying that, some will always need help. We are really keen to follow up with, there's a number of hubs in the community, so they're like drop-in centres. So what we need to do is stop young people getting to a crisis point, which is then when they need CAMHS. So what can we do before that? And we've looked at models in Australia and some models in the UK, and we have found that 60% of young people who feel that they have a drop-in opportunity to get mental health support, and that might just be a very informal chat with somebody about how they're feeling, it de-escalates issues for them and prevents it from getting to a crisis service that ends up in CAMHS. So that's really important. And then of course CAMHS itself needs to be reviewed, and you know, I really feel, I have to say, for CAMHS staff at the moment, as I do for teaching staff and school staff, it's an incredible incredibly difficult and demotivating environment to work in at the moment. And in the same way, we're talking about staff well-being in schools. We really need to be careful about staff well-being in CAMS as well, don't we? So it's very, very difficult.
Yes, and I think a number of people also mentioned the role of school counsellors as well, and that was something we saw building actually in the period up to, if you remember, school funding got incredibly tight 2017, 18, 19, and we saw actually some schools having to get rid of school counsellors, whereas it had been a sort of growing area. And I think someone's just put in the chat that actually it can be quite difficult to find school counsellors now. But Adrian, just moving to you, because it's also relevant to that issue of teacher overload and what is reasonable to expect our teachers to be able to provide, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, earlier today I was at Leo Academy's trust delivering some training on kind of staff well-being, and you know, a big focus of my training was you know, if it feels like there's too much to do, then there's too much to do. And you know, I seriously think we all need to, governors, teachers, school leaders, parents, we need to question what is happening in our schools day in, day out, because it's too much for teachers and it's too much for children. The expectations are unrealistic. The fact that we've just had 2 years of seriously disrupted education and now it's kind of back to normal, Ofsted are back in, we're focusing on curriculum again, you know, performance management, all the same old hoops. It's ridiculous. And we kind of have to question, what is the point? What are we trying to do here? You know, what is the point of education? Is to set children up for now and into the future. We need to give them the knowledge and skills they need to enjoy learning and to kind of, you know, follow their hopes and dreams in the future. And the system as it stands right now is not fit for purpose. It's not good enough. And, you know, organizations like the DfE and Ofsted have a big role to play in that. And that's not like pointing fingers and saying it's all your fault. We all have a stake in this, you know, as parents, as governors, as teachers, everybody, because ultimately our children are going to be the future prime ministers and leaders and business leaders, etc. But I just want to kind of emphasize like this point that schools and teachers have a major impact on children's well-being. Couple of things just to draw on a point Dee made about informal supports is children's kind of go-to choice. We have in our school year 6 peer mentors. We work with Bucks Mind, so we're in Buckinghamshire. Bucks Mind, the charity, they train up year 6 peer mentors who put themselves forward, and sometimes we carefully select children that we think actually this might be really good for their own self-esteem and development. They have 3 informal drop-in sessions a week where children can drop in and just speak to them. And a lovely way that some of our children framed the peer mentors is it's like having a big brother or sister in school that they can talk to. And what that means, what we've noticed is that those smaller issues often don't then spill into classroom and impact on lessons and learning time. And smaller issues, you know, picked up by the peer mentors don't turn into kind of bigger issues. So that's something that's quite low cost. It's really empowering, and we've found it's really successful. The other thing, just to emphasize the importance of relationships in schools, there was a Public Health Wales Bangor University report a couple of years ago looking at children dealing with ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. The more ACEs a child grows up with, the greater the risk of them developing a mental illness. And an ACE could be growing up in a home of domestic violence, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, significant bereavement in the family, parental separation, things like that. But what was really reassuring about the Public Health Wales research was that they were looking at children dealing with 4 or more ACEs, and they found that some, you know, had a level of resilience where they were maintaining good mental health despite challenging, you know, circumstances. And when they dug down, they found that typically children had certain protective factors. So Simone's mentioned one already, which is having a relationship with at least one safe, trusted adult. Think about a typical primary school, secondary school, you have multiple safe, trusted adults that children can turn to and rely on. Number 2 was supportive friends. And this is why relationships education, teaching children how to get on, online and in person is really important. And the third protective factor was regular participation in sports. And I think that's twofold. One, we know that regular physical activity is one of the best things for our physical and mental health. Secondly, most sports take place as part of teams. So you've got those relationships, those connections again. And just so these are things that happen day in, day out in many schools. We need to like really invest and prioritize these things. Secondly, someone mentioned in the chat about break times being cut in schools. This is, in my mind, a big problem in society in general. We are becoming increasingly sedentary. We're moving less. We know that 80% of boys and girls do not meet the minimum requirements of 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity a day. We know that schools are providing less break times. Children are sat down for longer periods in school, which is not great. Less PE is being taught, particularly in secondary schools. All of these things are within our control as families, getting our families moving, and schools can get their children sitting down less and moving more.
Thank you. That's also some really practical. I mean, you did the big system stuff with absolutely. Indeed, we're here in lots of different ways, in lots of different forums, and indeed work with other national associations to try and sort of move the dial on that. I'm not saying very successfully at the moment, but then coming down into those practical things. So that's really helpful, Adrian, and I'm sure Kay from Youth Sports Trust will be very pleased that you mentioned sports, but also there was a question earlier on about extracurricular activities. Okay, they're not always sports, but others as well, creative activities. And I just wanted to do a little bit of joining up with our seminar on Monday was around environmental sustainability, and one of the issues there also is about young people and the environment and the outdoors and how good being outdoors is for you. So there's some joining up where we'll get sort of double wins. But I don't know, having mentioned Joe and Richard before, are either of you there and unmuted and want to? Joe, you seem to be making lots of comments of good stuff that you'd been doing. Do you want to summarize any of that? And I now can see Richard, and you also mentioned that as a retired GP, you had some tips about access to health services. Perhaps I've misinterpreted. So why don't you say what you wanted to say?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah,
we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah. I think from a GP's perspective, I think we share the frustration in relation to access to services. I mean, one of the things that was always a frustration to us sometimes was when a child would come with a parent and with a simple message that the school has sent us and you need to refer us to CAMHS. It's a very difficult situation when you've in the middle of a surgery, you've got 10 minutes to try and ascertain what the problem is. Mm-hmm. I think the important thing is that we all need to work together well and communicate well. We're all frustrated, and we all need to understand what each person's difficulties is. If a child is, if the school does feel it's necessary for the child to come and see the doctor, we have an acronym in medicine called ICE, which underpins everything we do, and it's ideas, concerns, and expectations. So I don't think it's unreasonable for the school, if they have got a concern about a child, to actually elucidate that and think of those things. Think, what are your ideas? What do you think is going on? What are your concerns? And what do you expect to be done? And if you actually look at that before you actually send a child to a GP, you may actually realize actually that may not be the most appropriate thing to do. And I think in terms of CAMHS, certainly locally, we had an extremely good advice line, which we could access. And I'm sure that your school staff can access. It was run for about an hour every lunchtime. And if you had a particular concern about a child, it wasn't a major safeguarding issue, but it was enough to feel like you needed extra help. We always found that the advice line with CAMHS is incredibly useful in terms of that kind of early intervention or suggestions that they may have while the child has been waiting to be seen. I think there's also a common misconception that GPs can access CAMHS quicker than schools can, but essentially they can't. So the other thing is, and every GP practice, there will be a safeguarding lead. And I think if you have particular safeguarding concerns, you know, go find out who the safeguarding lead is at that practice. A more general point, I think early intervention is obviously crucial. And I think what we've got to look at is, I mean, certainly we have in-house counselling, which has been a godsend over COVID. But I think all the work's been done. It's been incredibly encouraging and like place to be. And we use Cooth, or we used to use Cooth quite a bit in our area. What you've got to think of is this actually is an investment for the future. And what will happen, hopefully, is that the need for mental health services for adults will become less, because you know the kids are prepared and know best what to do. And ironically, it actually may free up funding for you know, mental health services for kids. But I think, like all these things, it's kind of there's a silver lining to a cloud. I think the silver lining is actually we are equipping our children much better now than we ever have done for the future. So I mean, hats off to all the work that's been done at school, and it's been really interesting seeing it from both sides now, seeing it from the GP side and seeing it from the school side, understanding what your problems, the school problems are, and linking that to the problems that we saw. But if there's one message I can say, is we're all working at the same thing. And at times when things are stressed, you get frustrated, and sometimes frustration comes across as annoyance. But I can assure you that GPs, we have our own problems with our own well-being, I did tell you. And I know the colleagues that in practice are not sitting at home, sitting in their offices twiddling their thumbs. They're under a lot of pressure too, as we all are. And I think if we understand that and realise we're all trying our best, but in doing so, we need to make the best use of each other and not kind of pit one against the other, etc., etc. But the key thing, as always in these things, is communication. So that's how. And I would always be quite happy for schools, if they had concerns, to ring me as a GP and just say, look, I've got this problem. How do we deal with it? Rather than just sending somebody and saying, yeah, like a sort of proxy referral, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. Sort of knowing who you're safeguarding, and in some cases, some practices do have, don't they, adolescent mental health leads and others, but knowing who they are in the locality. Thank you ever so much. And that point about all public services, well, not just public services, third sector services as well, being stretched, and us needing to be cognizant of that as well. Thank you. And then Joe, I just happened to notice lots and lots of things that you were doing. So in terms of sharing some of those, you might want to add a little bit of colour to what you were saying in the chat.
Yeah, more than happy to. Disclaimer first, the book that I mentioned, Putting Staff First, was written by John Thompson and Alex Quigley. John was my head teacher up until he retired. That's definitely due to COVID. And Alex Quigley used to be our head of sixth form before he ended up running a trust. So that's my disclaimer that I know them both. But the premise of the book is all around treating staff humanely, removing barriers for them to be able to teach well, really thinking about how you support them. And obviously student behaviour and their well-being and everything comes into that. You don't, somebody said teacher well-being and student well-being is intrinsically linked. It certainly is. And at our school, what John built while he was there was an approach with teachers where we remove as much as we can that's an issue for them. So 55% we're a secondary school, 55% of our staff are part-time, which means we keep really good teachers and they can have families and look after them too. We have a focus currently on routines and responses. We're trying to get consistency amongst 180 staff. That's a challenge in itself, but consistency for those students, so they're getting the same responses, the same routines every time they walk in a lesson, to give them that trusted adult to be able to go to. We have a wellbeing worker, which is part of our local authorities role. They come and work with a handful of our students every week, but they also disseminate training into school, and that's been quite transformational actually in our pastoral staff, feeling that they can handle more than they thought they could. I think that's often a challenge with early help, is people not understanding that they do have the tools, it is there. And I think the latest thing that we've done is we have a Headspace app, which our year 7, 8 and 9 children have all been introduced to. And it's about teaching mindfulness and meditation, trying to make them a bit more resilient, so that when the challenges come, they've got tools themselves. They don't always have to come to somebody. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know whether I've missed anything that I put on there, but I did try and put it all on.
No, that's great, Jo. It's really good to hear all the different things that people are doing to make a difference. So thank you both so much. And I am conscious of the clock, so just returning to our 5 panelists, and I would ask each of you sort of to leave governors and trustees with a sort of take home message. What in particular would you like them not to forget about today's seminar? And I think I'll probably just do it in the same order, if that seems fair. So Dee, coming to you first.
Yes, so one that we find incredibly important is that the commitment to well-being and mental health support in schools has to be at SLT and governor level in order for it to be effective. And so the one take-home thing I suppose I have is an appeal to you as governors to just keep it on, put it on the agenda, keep it on the agenda, and make it a priority as much as you can.
Thank you very much. Simone, I know there's lots in train from your end, but what particular message do you have? Oh, you're still on mute.
Simply that for well-being and mental health to be a core part of the culture, it means that whatever subject is being discussed at your governing body, a question about its relevance to well-being and mental health is probably relevant. And so you can help make this a priority and stay a priority. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Kay.
I guess my one ask would be of governors to really challenge why you're doing the things for well-being. Understand the reason why you're putting that intervention or that support in, and address the issues, rather than thinking, well, we've got this list of programs and things we're doing, but are they really targeting and addressing the issues that your teachers or your young people face? So understand the issues and respond to the issues rather than put solutions in place.
Thank you. I think that's good advice actually for any issue that you're trying to address, isn't it? What are we really trying to solve? Thank you. And Marina, I'm sorry we haven't come back to you. There's been so much squashed into this half hour, but I think there are a couple of people on the chat who had been working with Place to Be and recommending you. But what are your final wishes for governors and trustees?
Yeah, thanks very much, Emma. I mean, for me, I think a common theme that comes up is around the support for staff that will in turn support our children and young people's mental health. And I think for that reason, it's looking at how we can support staff's well-being. And I would say, please go back and tap into the DfE grant to access a senior mental health leads. That is a key component that will allow you to take that strategic approach, that whole school approach that you need to build that capacity that Richard spoke about to support our children and young people.
Thank you very much. And yes, perhaps we haven't spoken enough of this afternoon about the Senior Mental Health Lead, but we absolutely do cover it in our material, and we'll make sure we continue to do so. And I'm now sort of thinking, oh, when we decided to focus on pupil wellbeing, because last time we did staff wellbeing, I'm now thinking, oh, perhaps that was a bit of a mistake. Perhaps we should have kept it integrated. So we'll make sure when we produce the resources next term we don't miss a trick. But Adrian, your final thought.
I would encourage more governing bodies to measure what you treasure. So if you really value staff and pupil wellbeing, then look into measuring and monitoring wellbeing in your school, because statistics show about half of schools don't currently do it. And the whole point of doing it is not just to measure and have more data. The whole point of doing it is to try and improve wellbeing. So work out what's working, celebrate those successes, start with a strengths-based approach, work out what's not working for your pupils and staff. As Jo says, see if you can remove as many of those barriers as possible. And then the important thing is you've listened to your community, then you need to act upon what people have said and have a cross section of staff, have your pupil parliament or your school council team, and work on an action plan. What has the survey thrown up? What can we put into place? To give a very practical example, our last pupil survey showed that children weren't happy with school facilities in our school. So we're investing a lot of energy and resources in redesigning our playground and looking at what is on offer at playtimes for our children. So we've listened, we're responding, we monitor again, we see if that's improved that score. And that's how it works. It's a constant cycle.
And that's absolutely brilliant. We didn't rehearse that, did we, folk? But actually, that fits so beautifully with the work that we do on setting strategic priorities, measuring what you treasure. Absolutely something we've banged on about in terms of setting and monitoring strategic priorities. And we are indeed promoting pupil voice with a lot of relation to this particular work. Elizabeth Collin, that I mentioned earlier, who will be making sure that our resource in the September term is useful, also does our work on pupil voice. So it's coming together well, I hope. So thank you all very much for joining the panel and sharing your intelligence. It's really, really helpful to have, but also thank you to our members who joined us today and are so very passionate about making sure they're doing the right thing for pupils and staff and their well-being. So I will wait a moment before we close down, just because I know that some people like to save the chat so that you do have that to hand, but we absolutely will go through all the questions, because I realize I didn't get them all answered, and make sure we cover them and take note of them when we're developing what we do. So please do stay in contact. This issue is not going to go away. I think we're all going to be working on it for some time to come. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope it's still sunny where you are. Bye-bye.